number of prospecting rights being granted over existing mines to politically connected empowerment groups, the spotlight has fallen off the nationalization of mines. But the ANC Youth League said at the weekend that it was still very much on the agenda. So how has nationalization worked elsewhere on the continent? Joining us is Pieter Steyn, chairman of Lex Africa and director at Werksmans Attorneys. Thank you so much for your time, Pieter. Let's start off with all the news that has come to the fore. We also know that the ANC in South Africa was talking about some more regulations coming to the fore when it comes to the mines and having perhaps a bigger hand to play. What do you make of all the news that has been hitting the wires?
I think that generally the policy question, the fundamental policy question is how can a country best leverage and maximize the benefits from its natural and other resources and from foreign and other local investments. So nationalization is certainly one of several types of approaches, policy tools, but it's quite an extreme one and raises several problematical issues. Most importantly, I think it's the ideological foundation that the state actually has a role in wealth creation, in producing goods for on sale in a market, as opposed to, for example, playing a regulatory role, distributing taxes and focusing on services like infrastructure, health, education, policing. The other key issue, of course, for nationalization is what's the effect on the private sector? I mean, it's fundamentally it's a rejection of the free enterprise model and the private sector involvement in the economy. The chilling effect that it might have on foreign and local investors is a serious risk factor. I mean, if you nationalize one industry, who's to say that other industries might not also be nationalized? It raises issues of compensation, I mean, practical issues. If you're going to pay compensation, that means a huge payment by the state to the former private sector owners. And one has to question timing in the country, particularly where hundreds of thousands of jobs have been lost as a result of recession, whether it's an appropriate policy choice, particularly when there are alternatives. And I think it's instructive to look at other African countries. Certainly it's interesting that no other African country or emerging market has got nationalization on its policy agenda at the moment.
But it has perhaps in the past. And Pieter, just looking at the whole issue though, because of course we've had the Mines Minister Susan Shabangu saying it's not going to happen in her lifetime. We had President Zuma also saying similar things recently. ANC Youth League determined to discuss it. It's going to be on this policy discussion document next month for the ANC. Do you think it's healthy to talk about it?
Well, I think the important thing is to see what are the other alternative policies.
What are the other alternative policies, Pieter?
Well, some are, for example, public-private partnerships, which is more voluntary. Others are in other African countries have got local ownership requirements or require corporate social investment to require skills transfers, training, that sort of thing. I think the Zambian example is particularly instructive because there they did nationalize the mines in the 60s. In 1995, they fully privatized the mines on very pro-investor friendly terms, in terms of certain development agreements. With the commodities boom, the government started to feel a bit shortchanged. And in 2008, they repudiated the development agreements and imposed a windfall tax on profits. The recession then intervened, mines started closing, 10,000 jobs lost, and the government withdrew and started. The approach now is a more collaborative approach with the private sector. So I think the message from Zambia certainly is that private sector has a role to play. It's a question of the government, private sector and other stakeholders getting together and finding some sort of balance of interests. So the nationalization model is really a unilateral state takes control of the wealth creation and product production mechanisms in the economy.
Zimbabwe is also an interesting one to look at because of the whole indigenization issue that came to the fore. And then you look across and you see what's happening in Australia. Of course, that tax that scared many investors away and, of course, many mining companies away. But I think the point to make here as well is that when you've got private companies coming onto your shores and taking goods out of your land, that there's got to be some kind of state intervention or some kind of beneficiation. So there needs to be a balance. And it's interesting because we've got Susan Shabangu on one hand saying that it's not going to happen in her lifetime, and we've got Jacob Zuma also being quite vehement about it. But then you've got Enoch Gonongwana, the Deputy Chairman of the NEC Subcommittee on Economic Policy, and talking about state intervention when it comes to nationalization of mines. And he says that there's little divergence with the Youth League as well. So, you know, you're getting conflicting views coming through from the government. And I think that the point we need to make is that it's going to become a reality down the line in some form or other. Hopefully, it's going to be conducive to still having a vibrant mining industry in the country.
Well, I think investors, both local and foreign, need certainty on the regulatory framework. I think that's fundamental. And security of tenure. You're not going to invest and spend time and management efforts and money if there's no certainty and security. I mean, the fact of the matter is that mineral rights are already owned by the state in South Africa. That's a fundamental reform that came about in 2004. So, I think the key issue is the regulatory framework something which needs to be amended? And if so, is nationalisation the more radical option the way to go?